Chen sword has been getting amazing reviews on YouTube. So I was impressed and I spent my own money and bought them. And so here I've received my own magnificent Chu Jian, which today I'm going to review. First impression on the sword is that the guard is very small. You can look at my thumb for size comparison. The handle is wrapped by a kind of cord that is a little bit soft to the touch. A lot of people say it's slippery. I find it feels all right to me. The scabbard comes lacquered with a Chu Kingdom traditional pattern. It's sort of a phoenix pattern, where in the Chu Kingdom back in the Warring States, the country's totem, essentially, is the phoenix. So it comes the phoenix pattern. The guard itself is a Taotie pattern from the Warring States to early Han design. Background on the sword. So the sword itself is called the magnificent Chu Jian. So Chu is one of the warring kingdoms before unification of China by the first emperor. And so it is one of the major powers during the Warring States. And it was said during the time that, within all of heavens, either the kingdom of Chen and the kingdom of Chu will unite all of the kingdoms. And it turns out that in history, Qing was the one that came out on top. But for a long time, Chu was a real contender, and they had a slightly different culture. So the culture of Chu was romanticized a lot in Chinese history. They had their own distinct set of poetry, their own distinct art direction. The style of the Chu kingdom is different from the Qing culture, which is much more flamboyant, it's much more romantic, and it's much more have much more freedom expression. That kind of come through in the scabbard design. After the Qing dynasty ended, what happened was that the country was once again in turmoil, and one of the descendants of the Chu Kingdom, who became a major power player, and the final struggle right before the formation of the Han dynasty was a struggle between the king of Chu versus the king of Han. Of course, Han came on top, and that's why we now call it the Han dynasty, and that's where the first Chinese Han ethnic identity was formed. So the sword is a throwback to that. It's a throwback to a different time where, a lot of people would think what could have been. The guard itself, I think I can see some 3D printed marks, and there's some polish. So I think what's happening is that, and you can also see it on the pommel itself. So I think what's happening is that they 3D printed these parts and then cast it from the 3D printed parts and then try to polish off the markings, which I think there's nothing wrong with it. It's very good. Something that I will personally do myself. The pommel and also the guard are so much smaller. The overall sword is actually very light. Actually surprisingly light. When you pull it out, the first thing you notice is that even though the sword length looks exactly what you would expect with a Chinese sword, the weight is really, really light. The blade length itself, I think feels standard for a Chinese sword, although the blade, the width itself is quite wide from the base of it. The weight of it, according to the website, is about 1.10 ounces. For comparison, my practice sword that I use all the time, my wooden sword, is about 1.32 pounds, which turns out to be somewhere around 1.48, 1.5 ounces. So the sword is very close to what I use for sparring and for practice, and that's made of wood and bamboo. So for me, using the sword feels extremely natural. Now, if you take a look at the profile of the blade itself, it is essentially an older design. The way the sword tip is designed is essentially a throwback, or it's during a transition phase from the older bronze Chinese jian. So they call it a gradual taper, but if you really look at it, you can notice that the taper comes in about 3 different parts, which is distinct for a Bronze Age Chinese sword, where the first third of the taper is rather gradual and straight, and there's a sudden increase at 1/3 of it. The cross-section of the blade itself is once again a transitional Bronze Age design, where instead of having the traditional sort of a diamond-shaped polish or sharpening, what happens is it actually has a 4-sided design on each side. So in Chinese, they call this a 8-sided design. So essentially, you will have 8 distinct different profiles in which you have the polish, and actually is quite a bit of work for the sword maker. The blade itself, you can't quite see in this video, but has a very beautiful folded pattern that is slightly acid-etched, but it's not overly strong. So you have to sort of look at indirectly in the light to recognize it. Blade center of gravity is about 1/4 of the entire length of the blade from the handle itself. It feels extremely natural, moving around with it. The edge is very sharp. I did some test cutting with it, and it performed extremely well. Although because I paid this with my own money, I don't plan to do any destructive tests with it, and I really want to preserve it. I don't want to break it. So the blade is something that you have to hold to actually appreciate. It's a different feeling from the more common Chinese sword, in which the common Chinese sword is about a little bit about 2 pounds in terms of weight. So when you actually use it, it's still a little bit heavy, and you have to sort of get used to it, because going from a sparring weapon to the real blade, there's about 1/2 pound at least of weight that a person have to get used to. Whereas for this blade, there's almost no gap. You spar with your sparring weapon, immediately you can use it. And I feel extremely good control with the blade itself because of the weight. So holding this blade, I feel like I can say this feels like the iPhone of the Han Dynasty, where having the blade itself is give you a sense of power. It is obvious to me that this blade is extremely effective in unarmored combat. So if the opponent is unarmored, this will simply be deadly. One comment about handling of the sword is that because the guard is very thin, I guess it's very short in terms of vertically, and there's not much protrusion. It doesn't make me feel very confident in a thrust towards an extremely hard target, because I always feel that there's a danger of my hand slipping. And that's probably why later swords have changed the design. So I think what that means, though, is that this sword was not meant to be a primary thrusting weapon originally. You can tell from the fact that the base handle has a sort of a wide taper that is designed such that when you hold on to the end of the hand and you swing it, it will not come loose. So it seems to me that the sword itself, and because of the wide blade profile, is meant to be more used as a slashing weapon and cutting weapon, and less of a thrusting weapon. Although thrusting is completely an option, and all techniques traditionally from the sword can be used easily by this design. So I do have some gripes about the sword itself. First is that maybe it's from the transport, but I find you see how the fitting of the scabbard is not very tight. So it will fall out by itself if I hold it upside down. It's something that you can process yourself. It's not a big deal. This happens very common because when they construct the sword, they have to measure exactly from the width of the blade and customize each scabbard so it fits tightly by friction. But during transport, what happened is that the temperature difference and moisture content would change the size of the scabbard. So it's really unpredictable how that happens during shipping. But it's an easy fix. You can start yourself. So I think it's okay. I think the arch direction of the Taotie itself is a little bit different, I think, from the other hardware design on the base of the scabbard. And I think that can be improved there. One thing I have to say about it is that the edge of the handle, the edge of the pommel is very sharp. So that essentially created a friction point when I attempt to double-hand it. So in the case where I attempt to double-hand like this with a sword, which is possible because of the length of it, you can do a 1.5 handle. The base of the sword really sort of drives into the base of my palm, and that is not very comfortable. But comfort is a relative thing. comfort, people in the past, they've had much rougher life and their hands are probably rougher. So I don't know if this is a historically accurate design, but just something that I guess for the modern person like me who is soft, you know, it'd be more comfortable if the edge is rounded off. Overall, I highly recommend this sword. It's, like I said, the workmanship is amazing. You have an A-sided polish that is a lot of work, and for the price of it, I think it's well worth it. It's a very addictive sword. Once again, everything. And I feel that it is in today's times, because we're no longer in the age of armored combat. It's actually a very practical weapon. I mean, not to say all swords are practical weapons anymore, but all considered, I can really see myself using it for all kinds of purposes. Like I said, there's no distance between the sparring weapon and this particular sword for me. My only wish is, from a practical point of view, is that the guard is a little bit larger, but this is historical, right? There's nothing you can really do about that. But yeah, so props to LK Chen. This is excellent weapon, excellent design, and I look forward to see more.